The first crack in the carefully constructed facade of my life didn't sound like a crack at all. It was the gentle, almost melodic chime of my phone, a notification from a shared calendar I hadn't realized I was still part of. Family summer retreat, payment due, it read. The date, 2 weeks from now. I stared at the screen, my coffee cooling on the polished granite of my kitchen island. The silence of my penthouse, usually a balm after a long day running my own tech consultancy, suddenly felt heavy, accusatory. They had done it again. Booked the sprawling lakehouse in the Adirondacks, the one with the wraparound porch and the private dock, and had simply assumed. Assumed I would cover the $5,000 deposit, as always. It was my contribution, my mother had once said with a brittle smile, since you value your privacy so much more than the rest of us. The unspoken part hung in the air, thicker than the Adirondack mist, since you chose a career over a family, your money is our family's money. My name is Cassandra. I'm 38, and I have built my life like I build code, with logic, precision, and layers of security to prevent catastrophic system failure. My family, the Vances, were the human equivalent of a virus, constantly probing for weaknesses in my firewalls. It wasn't always this transactional. I remember a time when my older brother, Julian, would let me tag along with his friends, his hand reassuring on my shoulder. I remember my sister, Isabelle, sneaking into my room to gossip about boys, our laughter muffled by pillows. Now, Julian's hand was always out, and Isabelle's gossip was a currency she traded for my compliance. The retreat was the annual pinnacle of this dysfunction. A week where I would fund a vacation I didn't want to attend, only to be paraded as the successful yet somehow deficient sibling. Cassandra can afford it, Julian would say, clapping me on the back a little too hard, his eyes avoiding mine. He'd been between ventures for the better part of a decade, his latest startup idea, a subscription service for artisanal firewood, having predictably fizzled out. His wife, Penelope, had mastered the art of the passive-aggressive compliment. "This wine is lovely, Cassie," she'd purr. "Is it terribly expensive? It must be, for someone with your palate." Meanwhile, their twin teenagers, Kai and Sloane, treated the rental property like a demolition derby, their faces permanently glued to devices I was inevitably asked to upgrade. Isabelle, 2 years my junior, was the emotional leech. Her life was a perpetual crisis, each one requiring a financial band-aid. A car repair, a maxed-out credit card, a wellness retreat to find herself. Our mother, Eleanor, was the puppet master, her love a conditional stream that flowed only towards those who upheld the family myth, that we were all endlessly supportive, and that my role was to be the foundation, the silent, uncomplaining pillar. Last year's retreat had been the tipping point. I had spent the week working remotely from the lakehouse, trying to close a multi-million-dollar merger. The Wi-Fi was spotty, the pressure immense. Instead of support, I was met with resentment. "Can't you just be present for once?" My mother had sighed during a family dinner I'd had to take a conference call in the middle of. Later, I overheard Kai, my nephew, whining to his father. "Why does Aunt Cass have to be here if she's just going to work? She's so boring. She didn't even get us the new Xbox." Julian's response was a low chuckle. "Because, buddy, someone has to pay for the boring people to have fun." The words had struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had stood frozen in the hallway, the polished floorboards feeling like ice beneath my feet. I was the patron saint of their good time, the boring, reliable engine in the shiny, broken-down car of their lives. I had smiled then, too. A tight, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. I paid for the Xbox the next day. I paid for everything. But that was a year ago. A year of silent festering. A year of watching the Venmo notifications pop up, Isabelle for groceries, Julian for kid sports gear, each one a tiny paper cut on my resolve. I had told myself I was keeping the peace, being the responsible one, the one who had her life together. The calendar notification glowed on my screen. Family summer retreat, payment due. My thumb hovered over the screen. The old Cassandra, the one programmed for duty, would have already opened the banking app, would have already transferred the funds with a resigned sigh. The new Cassandra, the one who had been quietly building a different kind of firewall, felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. I didn't delete the notification. I didn't transfer the money. I simply swiped it away, finished my coffee, and got ready for a day of meetings where my contributions were valued, respected, and paid for. The system was about to experience a catastrophic failure, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one running the repairs. I was going to be the one who pulled the plug. The silence lasted for 3 days. It was a heavy, pregnant thing, filling my pristine apartment with a tension I could almost taste. I went about my life, board meetings, strategy sessions, quiet dinners alone with a book, but a part of me was constantly braced for the impact. My phone, my last tether to their world, felt like a live wire in my pocket. I knew it was only a matter of time before the first breach in my newly erected walls occurred. It was my mother, of course. Eleanor Vance never shouted. Her weapon of choice was a specific, wounded tone of voice that could instill more guilt than a symphony of screams. When my phone finally vibrated with her caller ID, I took a deep, steadying breath before answering. "Cassandra, darling," her voice was smooth, laced with a feigned, light concern. "I'm just calling to check on the lakehouse payment. Julian said he got a reminder notice. I told him not to worry, that you're just terribly busy and it must have slipped your mind." There it was. The classic opening gambit. The assumption of my incompetence, not my defiance. It was designed to give me an easy way out, to let me apologize and wire the money immediately. "It didn't slip my mind, Mother," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "I saw the notification." A beat of stunned silence. I could picture her perfectly, sitting in her overstuffed floral armchair, her reading glasses perched on her nose, the receiver held just so. "I see," she said, the words carefully measured. "Well, the deadline is tomorrow. The agency is quite strict. You know how these seasonal rentals are." "I do," I replied. "I'm sure Julian can handle it. He's been talking about his new venture for months. This is a perfect opportunity for him to take on some financial responsibility." The silence on the other end was glacial. I had broken the script. "Cassandra," she said, the name a sharp exhalation. "What is this? Are you trying to make some sort of point? We are a family. We support each other. This pettiness doesn't suit you." "Paying a $5,000 deposit for a vacation I don't want to go on isn't support, Mother. It's subsidizing a lifestyle I don't endorse. And I'm done." The words were out, hanging in the digital space between us, stark and irrevocable. Her tone shifted from wounded to cold. "I see. So, after all we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By humiliating your brother and ruining a family tradition." A cold laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "What have you done for me, exactly? Besides teaching me that my only value is my bank account?" "The conversation is over. I won't be paying for the retreat. I won't be attending. Please don't ask again." I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated adrenaline of finally saying no. The calm that followed was short-lived. My phone began to light up like a war room console under attack. First, it was Isabelle. Her text was a masterpiece of melodrama. "Cass, Mom just called me sobbing. What did you do? She said you're abandoning the family. Are you okay? Do you need money?" The irony of her last question was almost beautiful. I didn't respond. Then, Julian. His call came through, and against my better judgment, I answered. He didn't bother with preamble. "What the hell, Cass?" he barked, his voice tight with a fury I knew was rooted in panic. "The deposit is due tomorrow. My credit is maxed out thanks to the firewood thing. You can't just drop this on us last minute." "I didn't drop anything on you, Julian," I said, my voice flat. "You booked it. You are responsible for it. That's how adulthood works." "Don't you dare lecture me about adulthood," he spat. "You with your perfect life in your glass tower. You have no idea what it's like out here. This vacation is for the kids. For Mom. Are you really going to punish them because you've decided to be a selfish bitch?" The word hung in the air, ugly and expected. It was his go-to insult for whenever I displayed anything resembling a backbone. "The conversation is over, Julian," I repeated, my tone leaving no room for argument. I hung up and blocked his number. A radical act that sent a thrill of liberation down my spine. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Penelope, Julian's wife, sent a long, rambling email about family unity, filled with Bible verses and guilt-laden phrases about the children's disappointment. I archived it. Then, the twins, Kai and Sloane, left a joint voicemail, their voices coached into a pathetic, whining tone. "Auntie Cass, please don't make us cancel our vacation. We never get to see you." I deleted it. The climax, however, arrived not with a shouted phone call, but with a quiet, determined knock on my apartment door at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I felt a jolt of surprise. It was my father. Arthur Vance was a quiet man, an architect who had long ago retreated into the solace of blueprints and models, leaving the emotional landscape of the family to my mother. His presence at my door was unprecedented. I opened it. "Dad." "Cassandra," he said, his kind, tired eyes looking past me into the apartment as if it were foreign territory. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked in, his hands shoved into the pockets of his worn corduroy jacket, and stood awkwardly in the middle of my living room, taking in the minimalist decor, the cityscape twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Your mother is very upset," he began, not meeting my gaze. "I'm aware. She feels you're tearing the family apart." "The family has been a hollowed-out shell for years, Dad. I've just stopped pretending it isn't." He finally looked at me, and I saw a profound sadness in his eyes. "I know," he said, so softly I almost missed it. The admission shocked me into silence. He'd always been complicit through his silence, but he'd never acknowledged it. "Then you know why I have to do this," I said, my voice softer now. "They're not going to stop, Cassie," he said, using my childhood nickname. "Your mother. She's called a family meeting. At the house. Tomorrow night. She expects you to be there. She wants to resolve this." A family meeting. Code for an ambush. A tribunal where I would be tried and convicted for the crime of self-preservation. I knew what it would entail: the tears, the accusations, the united front of them against me. They would use every weapon in their arsenal to break me down, to force me back into my role. For a moment, the old Cassandra surfaced, whispering about avoiding conflict, about keeping the peace. But then I saw Julian's sneering face, heard my mother's manipulative tone, felt the weight of years of financial and emotional servitude. I looked at my father, this man who had chosen a quiet life of surrender. I didn't want to become him. "Okay," I said, my voice clear and steady. He looked surprised. "You'll come." "I'll come," I confirmed. "But you need to understand something, Dad. I'm not going there to be negotiated with. I'm not going to be bullied into submission. I'm going there to state my terms. This ends tomorrow." He studied my face for a long moment, seeing a resolve there he had never seen before. He simply nodded, a slow, weary gesture, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "She's already told Isabelle and Julian that you're having a mental breakdown. That the stress of your job has become too much. They're planning an intervention." Of course they were. It was the final play. If they couldn't control my actions, they would pathologize them. "Let them," I said, closing the door behind him. The night before the meeting, I didn't sleep. Instead, I prepared. I wasn't going to war with tears or pleas. I was going with data. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet. It was a cold, brutal accounting of the last 5 years. Column after column of transactions. The loans to Julian that were never repaid. The down payment for Isabelle's car, the tuition top-ups for the twins' private school, the countless Venmo transfers for emergencies, the bills for the family vacations, the gifts that were expected and unappreciated. The total figure, when I finally calculated it, was staggering. It was enough for a down payment on a spectacular house of my own, a sabbatical year traveling the world, freedom. I printed it out. The paper was heavy in my hands, a physical testament to my own complicity in this dynamic. I had allowed this. But no more. The following evening, I dressed with intentional severity, a sharp, black tailored suit, my hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. I looked in the mirror and saw not a daughter, not a sister, but a CEO going into a hostile takeover. The drive to my parents' suburban home felt like a march to the gallows. The familiar streets, the manicured lawns, the oppressive normalcy of it all, it was a stage set, and I was about to tear down the curtains. My car was the last to arrive. Julian's beat-up SUV and Isabelle's trendy little coupe were already in the driveway. I took a deep breath, clutching the manila folder containing my spreadsheet, and walked inside. The scene in the living room was exactly as I had pictured it. My mother sat regally in her armchair, a queen on her throne. Julian was pacing by the fireplace, his face thunderous. Penelope sat stiffly on the sofa, refusing to meet my eye. Isabelle was curled in a corner, looking genuinely distressed, a box of tissues beside her. My father was in his usual chair in the corner, a ghost in his own home. All conversation stopped as I entered. The air was thick with unspoken accusation. "Cassandra," my mother began, her voice dripping with false concern. "Thank you for coming. We're all so worried about you." I didn't sit down. I remained standing in the center of the room, forcing them all to look up at me. "Let's skip the performance, Mother," I said, my voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. "I know you think I'm having a breakdown. I'm not. I'm having a breakthrough." Julian snorted. "Here we go. Another one of your dramatics." I ignored him and opened the folder. For the past 5 years, I have subsidized the lives of everyone in this room. I began to read the figures, my voice cold and clear. Julian and Penelope, $87,420. That includes 6 months of your mortgage after the firewood venture failed, 2 car leases, and private school fees for the twins. I turned my gaze to Isabelle. Isabelle, $42,300. For a car, credit card debt, 3 emergency trips, and what you charmingly called soul-searching retreats. Finally, I looked at my parents. Mother, father, the family vacations, the gifts, the unexpected bills, another 35,000. The grand total is in the high 6 figures. I let the number hang in the room. Isabelle had gone pale. Julian had stopped pacing, his fists clenched. "This isn't support," I continued, laying the spreadsheet on the coffee table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "This is exploitation. And it ends tonight." "How dare you?" my mother hissed, her composure finally cracking. "We are your family. This is what family does." "No," I said, my voice rising for the first time. "This is what we do. Or rather, this is what I do, and what you take. I am not your trust fund. I am not your emergency fund. I am your daughter. Your sister. And you have treated me with less respect than you would a bank teller." "So this is about respect?" Julian sneered, stepping toward me. "You want us to bow down and kiss your feet because you got lucky with some tech bullshit?" "It's about basic human decency, Julian. It's about you not calling me a selfish bitch for refusing to pay for your lifestyle choices. It's about you getting a job, a real one, instead of waiting for me to bail you out of your next half-baked scheme." The room erupted. Isabelle started crying. "Why are you being so mean?" Penelope stood up. "You can't just cut us off. The children. The children will be fine." I shouted over them, my control snapping. "They'll be better off learning that money doesn't magically fall from the sky when their father complains loudly enough." My mother stood up, her eyes blazing with a cold fire I had never seen before. "If you walk out that door, Cassandra," she said, her voice low and deadly, "if you do this, you are no longer a part of this family. Do you understand me? You will be dead to us." It was the ultimate threat. The one she had held over me my entire life. The fear of exile, of being cast out from the tribe. I looked at her, at this woman who had given birth to me, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty stillness. I looked at Julian, red-faced and entitled, at Isabelle, weeping performatively, at Penelope, clutching her pearls, at my father, hiding in the shadows. I had spent my life building a fortress of success, only to let these people live inside its walls, tearing it down brick by brick. No more. I met my mother's gaze, and I smiled. It was not a happy smile, but a smile of final, absolute liberation. Then I guess I'm dead, I said quietly. I turned my back on them, on my mother's stunned silence, on Julian's incoherent sputtering, on Isabelle's sobs, and I walked out. I closed the heavy oak door of my childhood home behind me, and for the first time, it felt not like a closure, but like an opening. The cold night air hit my face, and I breathed it in, deep and clean. It was the breath of a free woman. The war was over. I had just nuked the battlefield, and the silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The silence that followed me out of my parents' house was not the tense, waiting silence of the previous days. It was deep, absolute, and utterly peaceful. As I drove away, the manicured suburbs blurring into the bright, impersonal lights of the city, I felt a profound detachment. It was as if a constant, low-frequency hum that had been the soundtrack of my life had suddenly been switched off. There was no guilt. No second-guessing. There was only the quiet certainty of a necessary amputation. The limb was gone, and the phantom pain was, for now, blessedly absent. The first week was a study in surreal tranquility. I had braced for a renewed onslaught, angry texts, weeping voicemails, even a surprise ambush at my office. But nothing came. My phone, once a lightning rod for their demands, was silent. They had taken my mother's ultimatum to heart. I was, to them, dead. And I found I greatly preferred being a ghost to being a servant. I immersed myself in work, but now without the underlying anxiety of a family crisis waiting to erupt. I launched a new project with a clarity and focus that my team remarked upon. In the evenings, I cooked elaborate meals just for myself, drank wine I actually enjoyed without commentary, and sat in my silent apartment, not with loneliness, but with a sense of delicious solitude. I was rediscovering the person I was when no one was watching, when no one was demanding a piece of her. The first crack in their unified front came, unsurprisingly, from Isabelle. After 10 days of radio silence, an email popped up in my personal inbox. The subject line was simply, "I need to talk to you." It was not the dramatic, guilt-ridden missive I expected. It was stark and desperate. "Cass. I know Mom said not to contact you. But I don't have anyone else to ask. The loan I took out to cover my part of the retreat. The payments are killing me. My credit cards are maxed out. I got a final notice on my car insurance today. I don't know what to do. I'm not asking for money. I swear. I don't know who else to talk to. You were always the one who figured things out. I'm scared. Izzy." I read it 3 times. This was different. There was no performance here, no script from our mother. This was the raw panic of someone who had never been required to build her own foundation. A small, treacherous part of me softened. This was my little sister, the one I'd shared a room with, the one who'd looked at me with wide, admiring eyes. But that sister was gone, replaced by a woman who saw me as a life raft. I closed the email. I would not be her lifeguard. Not anymore. But her message confirmed something. Their house of cards was already trembling. The retreat had happened, I later gleaned from a carefully worded social media post by Penelope, a group photo of them all on the lakehouse dock, their smiles looking strained. They had somehow scraped the money together, likely by piling debt onto already crippled credit. It was a Pyrrhic victory, and the bill was about to come due. The true reckoning arrived a month later, not through a desperate plea, but through the cold, formal medium of a legal letter. My assistant brought the thick, cream-colored envelope into my office, her eyebrows raised. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart did not hammer with fear. It beat a slow, steady rhythm of cold curiosity. I slid it open. It was a letter from my mother's attorney. She was not suing me, even she knew that was a futile and embarrassing endeavor. No, this was more insidious. The letter formally stated that, following my voluntary and public disassociation from the Vance family unit, I was hereby removed from my grandmother's trust. The trust was modest, a collection of heirlooms and a small stock portfolio that had been intended to be split evenly between my mother's children upon her passing. My share, the letter coldly informed me, would be redistributed to Julian and Isabelle. It was her final, grand gesture. She was cutting me off with the only thing she had left, the past. She was disinheriting me from the family legacy. It was meant to be a devastating blow, a permanent mark of my exile. I set the letter down on my desk, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was so perfectly, pathetically her. She couldn't control my future, so she was trying to vandalize my claim to the past. The monetary value was negligible to me, but the symbolism was priceless. It was the final, undeniable proof that I had done the right thing. A mother who loved her child does not respond to a cry for autonomy with financial dismemberment. I drafted my response myself, then had my lawyer vet it. It was brief and to the point. To the estate of Eleanor Vance. I acknowledge receipt of your letter dated. I relinquish any and all present or future claim to the assets of the trust established by my grandmother, Lillian Vance. I require no further communication regarding this matter. Sincerely, Cassandra Vance. Sending that letter felt more significant than walking out of their house. It was me signing the divorce papers. It was me giving back the ring. I was not just leaving, I was actively, legally, and emotionally severing the tie. The ballast was gone, and I felt lighter than air. The fallout was quiet but seismic. A mutual acquaintance, an old family friend who had always viewed my mother with a healthy skepticism, sent me a discreet message a few weeks later. Heard from your mother the other day, she wrote. She mentioned you were focusing on your career and had stepped back from the family. She looked tired, Cass. And Julian. I saw him bagging groceries at Whole Foods. I almost didn't recognize him. The image was jarring. Julian, the golden boy, the eternal entrepreneur, reduced to a minimum wage job. There was no schadenfreude, only a distant, clinical sense of inevitability. The system had collapsed the moment its primary power source was disconnected. The final message came on a rainy Sunday afternoon. It was from my father. Not a call, but a text. It was the first direct communication from any of them in over 2 months. Your mother is not well. The stress has taken a toll. She doesn't leave her room much. I thought you should know. I hope you are finding what you were looking for, Cassie. I stared at the words. There was no accusation in them, just a statement of fact and a faint, weary well-wish. He was the only one who had ever called me Cassie. I felt a pang then, not for my mother, but for him. For the man who had chosen a life of quiet capitulation and was now living with a hollowed-out result. I did not reply. There was nothing left to say. Any response would be a form of engagement, a reconnection to the toxic web. My silence was my final gift to myself. I stood and walked to my window, watching the rain streak down the glass, blurring the brilliant city below. The war was over. The battles had been fought, the confrontation, the financial standoff, the legal severance. I had not just won, I had secured my independence. The Vance family, as I had known it, was gone. In its place was a complicated silence and a landscape of scorched earth. But from that scorched earth, I was finally growing. I was no longer Cassandra the bank, the servant, the boring one. I was just Cassandra. The quiet in my apartment was no longer an absence, it was a presence. It was the sound of my own life, finally, fully, belonging to me. I took a deep, clean breath. It was over. And for the first time in my adult life, I was truly, unequivocally, and peacefully, free. The silence held. It was no longer the tense, waiting silence of the first few weeks, but a deep, settled quiet, as if the world had finally found its correct, natural state. My life, once a chaotic symphony of other people's demands, had become a minimalist composition. I worked. I traveled. I read. I sat in my apartment and simply existed, without the background noise of guilt and obligation. The phantom limb of my family no longer ached, it was as if it had never been there at all. 6 months after the final text from my father. I was packing for a solo hiking trip to Patagonia. A trip that would have been unthinkable before, both financially, as my money was now truly my own, and emotionally, as I no longer had to justify my absences or fear the crisis that would inevitably erupt the moment I was out of reach. As I was finalizing my itinerary, an email notification popped up. It was from a prestigious architectural journal. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding Arthur Vance." Puzzled, I opened it. The editor explained they were compiling a feature on overlooked masters of mid-century modernism, and were keen to include my father. They had found his old professional details but had been unable to reach him. A mutual contact in the industry had suggested I might be able to facilitate an introduction. A strange warmth spread through my chest, followed by a sharp pang of sorrow. My father, the quiet dreamer, being recognized. I thought of the beautiful, intricate models that had once filled his study, now likely gathering dust in the attic, forgotten by everyone, especially by him. This was not a bridge back. It was a separate path, one I could choose to walk down or not. I replied to the editor, providing my father's last known email and phone number. I did not offer to intervene. I simply connected them. It was the most I could do, a small acknowledgement of the one person in that house who had, in his own broken way, shown me a sliver of understanding on that last night. It was an act for the man he might have been, not for the family he had enabled. I left for Patagonia the next day. For 2 weeks, there was no email, no phone signal, just the staggering, humbling scale of mountains and glaciers. I stood at the base of granite peaks that had stood for millennia and felt the final, insignificant weight of my family's drama blow away in the Andean wind. The world was vast, and my place in it was mine alone to define. When I returned, tanned and weary, my soul felt scoured clean. The first thing I did, even before unpacking, was check my email. Among the newsletters and work messages, there was one that stood out. It was from my father. "Cassie." A mun from the journal called. "Thank you for the connection. I've sold the house. Your mother has moved to a smaller condo near Julian. He and his family are in a rented townhouse. It's cramped. Isabelle is staying with them for now. It seems I am the one who is stepping back now. I've rented a small place by the coast. I have a room for my drafting table. The light is good. I hope your travels were good. Dad." The email was a masterpiece of his typical terseness, but between the lines, I read a revolution. He had left. He had walked away from the gilded cage my mother had built, from the chaos of Julian's life. He was, in his late 60s, finally building a room of his own. I felt a surge of pride so fierce it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. He had found his courage, too. We were, in our own separate ways, free. I wrote back, just as brief. "Dad. I'm glad. The coast sounds perfect. Send me a picture of your view when you're settled. Cassandra." It was not a reconciliation. It was a thread, thin and fragile, stretched across a great distance. It was enough. A year to the day after I walked out of my parents' house, I was offered the CEO position I had been working towards for a decade. I celebrated alone, with an expensive bottle of champagne, watching the sunset from my balcony. The satisfaction was pure, undiluted by the need for their approval or tainted by their resentment. It was entirely mine. Out of a lingering, clinical curiosity, I did a final check on the ghosts of my past. A quick search revealed that Julian's artisanal firewood startup had been officially dissolved. Penelope's social media was a stream of inspirational quotes about resilience, interspersed with passive-aggressive memes about those who forget where they came from. Isabelle, I discovered through a public record search, had finally filed for bankruptcy. It was the inevitable conclusion to a life built on a foundation of sand. There was no pleasure in seeing it, only a quiet confirmation of the laws of cause and effect I had finally enforced. My mother never contacted me again. I heard through the same old family friend that she referred to me only as her daughter, the CEO, a title she used as both a weapon of social one-upmanship and a bitter reminder of my betrayal. She had rewritten history, and in her version, I was a distant, successful acquaintance, not the daughter she had exiled. One evening, I was cleaning out a closet and found a small, tarnished silver box. Inside was a necklace my grandmother had given me when I was a girl. It was simple, a single pearl on a chain. I had forgotten about it. My mother had always insisted it was meant to be part of the family trust, a thing to be controlled and allocated, not a gift to be enjoyed. I took it out, polished it until it shone, and put it on. It felt light against my skin, a small piece of the past I could reclaim on my own terms. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back was calm, her eyes clear and untroubled. The sharp edges of anger and resentment had been smoothed away by time and distance, not into softness, but into unshakable resolve. The story of the Vance family had ended. My brother was a stranger struggling to survive. My sister was a cautionary tale. My father was a quiet man by the sea, rediscovering his dreams. My mother was a bitter queen in a diminished court. And I was finally, simply, Cassandra. I had not just survived the collapse, I had been liberated by it. The silence was no longer something to be endured. It was the sound of my own peace, a deep, resonant, and everlasting quiet. I was whole. I was free. And that was everything.